Hey, USA, I'm nobody, just an American, and this is Just an American Moment. This is the podcast where we ask the questions that the mainstream media are failing to ask, and we ask the questions and provide solutions for those issues and questions that the political class either can't answer or won't answer or refuse to answer. So, this is our fourth in a series. I'm the author of the book I'm Nobody, Just an American, which I hope you go out and get. And I'd like to go kind of back to where we were last week for just a second. Last week, as I indicated, people were asking me about what topics we would cover going forward. And it was funny because this week, one of the topics that kept coming up was Hunter Biden. And I'm saying, haven't we all heard enough about Hunter Biden already? I mean, after all, he's on his book tour now, the one he got $3 million up front for. Uh, and he makes big jokes about having been an addict. But the kind of interesting thing is, no one has asked old Hunter the question. So, how did you manage to lie on a gun application and not be prosecuted for it? And I don't think we're ever going to know because it's going to be buried and nothing's ever going to happen to old Hunter, which is why I'm not going to talk about Hunter. In fact, quite honestly, I'm not interested in Hunter. What I am interested in is his father, because his father's taking actions and doing things that are critically impacting this country for the negative. Uh, the types of things that we've seen already with the border, with China relations, etc., are all things that are a threat to our economy, they're threats to our national security, and they're even threats to our health and welfare. It was only, a few weeks ago where he put through the $1.9 million COVID relief package. COVID relief package, which had roughly 9% that actually went for COVID relief. The rest all went to pet projects and the return of favors to political supporters. Uh, Another abuse of American taxpayer dollars. And I don't know about you, but I'm getting tired of it. It's funny because in my book, I write a whole chapter entitled The Magic Christian, where I talk about government spending and just how out of control it's gotten. So my feeling is I've just been thinking about how our money goes into a black hole and we never know where it goes. Let me give you a good example, and particularly because the president has now proposed an infrastructure project. Well, under the Obama administration, if you recall, Obama proposed, and of course Biden supported, $1 trillion for shovel ready jobs. Yes, we're going to get Americans out there with their shovels and they're going to build highways. Except Obama ultimately admitted, long after he served, that there were no shovel ready jobs. And it's like, okay, that's great that you admitted it. Where'd the $1 trillion go? Somebody is making money. Where'd it go? Do we have $1 trillion not accounted for? Where is it? Why hasn't the media asked? Has anyone ever tracked the money to see how it was spent? Why aren't our elected officials, and I don't care whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, why haven't they tried to tell us where that money went, how that money was spent? It is really, really a concern because now on the table is a $2.5 trillion infrastructure proposal. 2.5 trillion taxpayer dollars. Is that all going to end up in the government black hole? I wonder. The whole idea of shovel ready jobs just makes me want to laugh. And I'll talk about that in a second. But let me ask you something. If you were going to start a business, you had $100,000 to invest, $1 million to invest, $10 million to invest. When you were out looking for the CEO to run that company, would you hire an individual who never had a real job, never managed a business, never invested a business, never started a business, never made a payroll, and never came up with an original idea? Would you hire an individual who spent 50 years, almost a half a century of their life, accomplishing nothing? And now we have somebody with those credentials saying they want to manage $2.5 trillion. That makes the Obama administration's 1 trillion, look like nothing. 2.5 trillion. And the problem is the guy doing it, let's be honest, he's an anachronism. He's a guy living in the past. He's a guy talking about shovel-ready jobs like he's living during the Depression or the New Deal. This is the same guy who killed the XL pipeline. Good, high-paying, union jobs. And he killed it. Why? For revenge. This is the kind of guy we want with $2.5 trillion? Shovel-ready jobs? His own naivete shows that he doesn't realize that we need tech-ready jobs, tech-savvy jobs. And I don't mean the kind of jobs that they're talking about in the Green New Deal. Because let me tell you, folks, the Green New Deal is not going to happen. Not the way Joe and company think it's going to happen. There'll be green technology in this country, but it will be sensible. And what we've seen so far isn't sensible. The problem is that this infrastructure proposal is negatively going to impact our economy, our national security, and our health and our welfare. And if you don't believe me, let me talk about two industries real quickly here. The first of those industries is the pharmaceutical industry. Do you realize that 80% of all pharmaceuticals are manufactured offshore, predominantly in Asia, other places in the world, but offshore, and in many cases, third world countries? Do you realize that 100% of generic pharmaceuticals are produced outside the United States, so that every time you or one of your loved ones takes a generic drug, that drug was not manufactured in this country? And they'll try and tell you that it all has to do with labor. The labor is cheaper in these countries. The labor is cheaper in the country. It doesn't have anything to do with labor anymore. It has to do with the regulatory environment in the U.S. It has to do with the tax structure in the U.S. for corporations. And it actually has to do with the know-how when it comes to manufacturing, because we've lost that in this country. That was all outsourced years ago, and right now it's not coming back. Another industry, so before I move on to the next industry, so think about it. Think about the impact on your health and welfare, national security, and the economy in general by the fact that all of that takes place offshore. The other industry is the semiconductor industry. The semiconductor industry, if you're not aware of it, is chip technology. It's the stuff that goes into your cell phones, goes into your computers, goes into our sophisticated weapon systems, goes into the planes that you fly in. There's the cars you drive. There's basically nothing that you do that doesn't involve semiconductor technology. Well, 80% of all semiconductor manufacturing takes place outside this country. And again, predominantly in Asia, with a huge amount of it in China, Taiwan, and Korea. And the thing about it that concerns me, and the thing that I want to point out, particularly as it relates to our national security, is think about it for a minute. Asia today is not one of the most stable places in the world. You've got China making threats against Taiwan. You've got the clampdown of the democracy movement in Hong Kong. Uh, India is constantly feuding with Pakistan. There are threats everywhere. So think for a moment, what happens to our supply chain if there's a conflict in this region? Okay. Or more so, what happens if China decides they're pretty pissed off at the United States? And guess what? They're going to slow things down a little bit. They're going to clamp down on production of the chip technology that we need for most everything that we have in this country. Or think about what happens if there's a clampdown on the production of pharmaceuticals. You know, most of the acetaminophen and ibuprofen and warfarin that's made in the world is made in China. So imagine if suddenly the supply chain on those drugs slows down. What happens to you and your family? It's something to really consider. And yet we're not ready. We're not ready at all. You know, one of the things I wanted to talk about in that regard is that we have a government, a Congress, and really a president at this point in time who don't know how to be positively proactive. They are totally reactive. Anything that happens in the world seems to catch them by surprise. And my example with pharmaceuticals and semiconductors will be one of those events. They'll act surprised. So, because they don't know how to be positively proactive, they're either going to be reactive or, even worse, they're going to be negatively proactive. And God knows what that means. We're already seeing it really with the infrastructure bill and how they propose to pay for it. And when they talk about how we're going to move this country forward with green jobs, well, I just have one thing to say. Take a look at Solyndra. You remember Solyndra? $500 million of taxpayer money. You remember that? Now, I used to be an executive in the solar industry, and I can tell you that everyone who was an executive in the solar industry knew Solyndra was going to fail before it ever got off the ground. And there are multiple reasons for that, which perhaps I'll talk about in the future. But the thing is, we are now at risk, and the connection to this infrastructure bill is only going to make things worse. It's just another fat cow, porky bill that Congress has come up with and Joe Biden is all enthusiastic about. But my role here today is not to just complain about this, it's to offer some solutions. So I put a list together here. Pardon me for reading off it, but here are just some of the things, and these are just a few, that we could do right now that might make the situation better. The first thing is that the infrastructure bill as it stands needs to be broken into smaller bills. And each project within that bill needs to be self-sustaining and self-funding. If it can't do that, it should be tossed. Let's remove all the pork and get down to what the real needs of this country are. The second thing is the corporate income tax either needs to remain at the 21% it's at right now, or I favor actually lowering it to 19%. Increasing it is going to kill businesses and it's going to force manufacturing to stay offshore. Take my word for it. And anyone who thinks that, oh, we'll find ways to get money out of these corporations, obviously it hasn't worked for a corporation. and they have to be pretty naive.